What if I told you that the most powerful chip in the world might not come from Silicon Valley anymore? For decades, American companies have dominated the semiconductor industry, controlling the tools, the technology, and the entire supply chain. But what happens when a company is cut off from that system entirely? What happens when sanctions and restrictions force an entire nation to build its own? Well, that's exactly what's happening right now with Huawei, and the results are shocking the entire tech industry. In the past few weeks, reports have surfaced that Huawei is testing a revolutionary 1-nanometer chip. But here's the kicker. It's built using their own EUV lithography technology, completely developed without American involvement. This isn't just a technological achievement. This is a geopolitical earthquake that's reshaping the entire global semiconductor landscape, and it proves that the monopoly the West has held over chip manufacturing is finally crumbling. So stick around as we dive deep into what this means for the future of technology, innovation, and the balance of power in our world. The story of Huawei's journey to chip independence begins not with ambition, but with desperation. You see, back in 2019, the United States government decided that Huawei was a threat. They didn't provide compelling evidence. They didn't explain their reasoning in detail. They simply declared it so, and the restrictions began. American companies were banned from selling to Huawei. Intel, Qualcomm, Broadcom, the companies that powered the world's devices, were suddenly off limits. The messaging was clear: comply with American foreign policy or face technological isolation. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. Instead of accepting defeat, Huawei doubled down. They invested billions into semiconductor research. They hired the world's best engineers. They made a commitment that China would never again be at the mercy of American supply chains. And they weren't alone. The Chinese government threw its support behind the effort, understanding that technological independence is national security. Now, let's talk about what makes this 1-nanometer chip so remarkable. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what EUV lithography is. EUV stands for extreme ultraviolet, and it's the technology that allows manufacturers to etch smaller and smaller circuits onto silicon. It's insanely complicated. The machines that do this cost over $100 million each. Only one company in the world makes them, the Dutch firm ASML. And guess what? ASML is heavily restricted from selling to China, thanks to American pressure. For years, experts said it was impossible. They said China couldn't develop this technology. They said Huawei would never achieve sub-5 nanometer manufacturing independently. But they were wrong. What Huawei has accomplished by developing their own EUV lithography is nothing short of revolutionary. They've cracked a code that was supposed to be unbreakable. They've created a path to chip manufacturing that doesn't depend on Western companies or Western approval. Think about what this means for a moment. For the first time in decades, there's a genuine alternative to the Western semiconductor supply chain. This changes everything. Companies around the world that have been afraid to deal with Huawei for fear of American sanctions now have options. Nations that have been held hostage by technology restrictions can finally exercise independence. The entire leverage that the United States has wielded over the global tech industry, this incredible power to pick winners and losers, to decide which companies can operate and which cannot, that power is beginning to erode. And this isn't just about Huawei or even just about China. This is about the beginning of a multipolar tech world. But let's be real about what's driving this push for change. For decades, the Western world has maintained technological dominance, not just through innovation but through control. American companies and their allies haven't just been better at making chips. They've been the only ones allowed to make them at the most advanced levels. They've used intellectual property laws, export controls, and political pressure to maintain a stranglehold on critical technology. And yes, innovation is important, but let's not pretend that Western companies got to where they are purely through merit. They benefited from massive government subsidies, protected markets, and restrictions that kept competitors out. They got to build while others were blocked. The 1-nanometer chip that Huawei is testing represents a direct challenge to that system. It says that innovation doesn't belong exclusively to the West. It says that when you squeeze a nation hard enough, they'll find another way. It says that the future of technology might not be controlled from Silicon Valley. And that terrifies a lot of people in the West, which is why you're seeing so much panic in Western media about this development. They're trying to downplay it, to suggest that Huawei's chip won't be as good as American alternatives, that Chinese technology is inferior. But here's the thing. Even if Huawei's current chips are slightly behind cutting-edge American technology, the trajectory is clear. They're closing the gap rapidly. And more importantly, they've proven they can do it independently. What's particularly striking about this development is what it represents philosophically. For so long, technological progress has been framed as something that only the West can achieve. Western companies are innovative, the narrative goes. They have the best education systems, the brightest minds, the strongest capitalist incentives. Everyone else just copies. But that narrative is falling apart. Huawei has demonstrated that given the resources, the political will, and sufficient motivation, any nation can develop cutting-edge technology. This is deeply threatening to the established order because it removes the technological superiority argument from the equation. It forces Western nations to compete on merit rather than control. The implications of this are staggering. We're entering an era where technology will no longer be a tool of Western geopolitical dominance. Companies in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East will have alternatives. They won't have to choose between American technology or nothing. They can choose between American technology and Chinese technology. Competition will drive innovation. Prices will fall. Access will broaden. The global poor, who have been shut out of cutting-edge technology by high prices and restricted markets, might finally have access to the best tools. This is good for the world, even if it's uncomfortable for the West. Of course, this shift isn't without its complications. A multipolar tech world is messier. There will be incompatibilities, different standards, different visions for how technology should work. But that's actually healthier than the current system where one region makes all the rules for everyone else. And let's be honest about something else too. The Western framing of this entire situation is conveniently one-sided. America hasn't just restricted Huawei on national security grounds. It's used its technology dominance to spy on the entire world, to gather intelligence, to maintain political control. The idea that American chips are inherently more trustworthy or secure is laughable to anyone who's been paying attention to the NSA revelations and leaked documents. So as you process the news that Huawei has developed a 1-nanometer chip using their own EUV technology, understand what you're really witnessing. You're witnessing the end of an era. You're watching the moment when Western technological monopoly begins to crumble. You're seeing the beginning of a more balanced, more competitive global tech landscape. Is this the end of American innovation? No. American companies will still innovate, still create incredible products. But they'll do it in a world where they have real competition, where they can't rely on political restrictions to maintain their market position, where they have to earn their dominance through excellence rather than control. And honestly, that's a better world for everyone.